When you think of Star Trek, who comes to mind? Probably Captain Kirk, right? Or Mr. Spock. Maybe even its creator, Gene Roddenberry. But what if I told you the person who really saved the Starship Enterprise from being scrapped before it ever launched was someone completely different and totally unexpected?
So, who was the single most important person behind Star Trek? I mean, without this one person, the most influential sci-fi show in history would have been just a single failed pilot that nobody ever remembered. The answer is gonna surprise you.
Okay, so our story kicks off way back in 1964. You've got a creator, Gene Roddenberry, with this huge, audacious idea. He wanted to tell these sweeping stories about humanity's future, but first, he had to sell it to the Hollywood of the present.
A wagon train to the stars. That was it. That was the simple, kind of brilliant pitch Roddenberry used to sell his incredibly complex new show. He basically framed it as a classic Western, an adventure, just set in space, the final frontier. But see, underneath that simple pitch was something way deeper. Roddenberry saw every episode as two things at once, a nail-biting adventure and also a morality tale. He wanted to use science fiction as a way to talk about the really tough social issues of the 1960s. And somehow, he actually sold this radical idea to a production company called Desilu.
But Roddenberry's brilliant idea almost immediately slammed into a brick wall. NBC agreed to pay for a pilot episode and, well, it failed. Spectacularly.
The first pilot, called The Cage, cost a jaw-dropping $630,000. To put that in perspective, it was the most expensive television pilot ever made at the time. And after all that money was spent, the network took one look at it and absolutely hated it.
Too cerebral. That was NBC's official verdict. They thought it was just too smart, too philosophical for a regular audience. And look, in the world of 1960s television, a rejection like that was a death sentence. Game over.
And their complaints didn't stop with the script. The execs also hated two of the show's most forward-thinking ideas. They thought Mr. Spock looked satanic, and they could not handle the idea of a woman being second in command of a starship. So that was it. The show was dead. Or, so it seemed.
Right when the Starship Enterprise was about to be turned into space dust for good, an unlikely hero stepped in, and she was a true Hollywood legend.
The person running Desilu Productions was none other than Lucille Ball. Yeah, that Lucille Ball. By 1964, she had divorced Desi Arnaz and bought him out, making her the first woman in history to run a major television studio. She wasn't just a comedian, she was one of the most powerful people in town.
Now, the business decision here should have been a complete no-brainer. Her own board of directors looked at this failed, incredibly expensive pilot and told her, "Lucy, cut your losses, kill Star Trek." But Lucille Ball, she didn't listen. And what she did next was so rare, so bold, that it would completely change the course of science fiction forever. She went right back to NBC and pushed them to do something that was pretty much unheard of: order a second pilot. This meant throwing even more money at a project they had just flat out rejected. In the 1960s, this just wasn't done. It was crazy. Lucille Ball personally overruled her entire board. And when NBC was still hesitant, she put Desilu's money where her mouth was, personally financing a brand new pilot, which would become Where No Man Has Gone Before. She believed in Roddenberry's vision when absolutely no one else did. And her massive gamble paid off. A quote from Edwin Hawley, an accountant at Desilu, really says it all. If it were not for Lucy, there would be no Star Trek today. Her financial backing, her willingness to take that huge risk, that's what made all the difference. But here's the thing. Lucy's gamble was only the first part of her genius. The second part was a business innovation she had pioneered years earlier, one that would give Star Trek its second and, honestly, its most important life.
You see, years before Star Trek, Lucy and Desi Arnaz had basically invented the TV rerun. They figured out that a show could keep making money for decades in syndication. In fact, Lucy specifically told her team to find her a show that could rerun for as long as I Love Lucy. She was always thinking about the long game.
And that is exactly what happened. Sure, NBC canceled Star Trek after just 3 seasons, but that's when Lucy's long-term vision kicked in. In syndication, in reruns, the show finally found its audience and just exploded in popularity. That success, built entirely on reruns, is the direct reason we got the first movie in 1979, which resurrected the whole franchise.
So the irony is, the very thing NBC rejected, the fact that it was too cerebral, that became its greatest strength. A dedicated audience finally had a chance to discover it. Lucille Ball's creative faith and her brilliant business model worked together perfectly to create a pop culture legend.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's the next Star Trek? What revolutionary idea out there, one that maybe seems too weird or too cerebral for today, is being saved right now by a modern-day Lucille Ball, some unlikely champion who sees a future that nobody else does?